Welcome to Haunted Histories. I'm your host, Bobby Morrison, and this is the podcast about haunted locations in Ontario, Canada. The history of the land, building, property, and owners will be discussed, along with the stories of alleged hauntings and my final thoughts. I myself believe in the paranormal, but I leave all of this to you, the listener, to decide for yourself. This is the third episode in this mini-series, and if liked, it will continue. The first episode was on Whitby's Lind House, the second on the Canadian Automotive Museum, and the connections to the Oshawa Museum in South Oshawa. This episode is a teeny bit different. In this episode, I will be talking about Ghost Road in Port Perry by Lake Scugog. As per every episode, I interview someone interesting, and in this one, I interviewed my friend Alex Cairns, who used to live in Port Perry. We discussed the road, the legend behind it, and possible reasons for the hauntings, along with some haunted places in Port Perry that I will discuss more in future episodes. To begin, I will discuss the history and legend and then get right into the interview. I will show photos of the road and Port Perry itself. First and foremost, the Ghost Road is difficult to film because, well, it's a dark road in the Ontario countryside. One of my professors told me that TV news reporters tried to do stories on this road for the ghostly legends, but because it's a darkened road, it makes for some uninteresting visuals. I know that in ghost shows, like big time ghost shows, like Ghost Adventures, these visuals can sometimes be exciting, the green camera in the middle of the night, but it can also be boring at times, so I will try to keep this as interesting as I can. The Ghost Road legend is that of a headless motorcyclist going down the road, allegedly in the late 1950s or 1960s, 1958 and 1968 to be specific. He went too quickly down the road and crashed into a barbed wire fence, decapitating him. Now on the road, allegedly people will see a headlight coming towards you that in some counts, like my guest told me, the headlight turns red to signal where he died, or the headlight just goes out and you pass nothing. Sometimes there's a motorcycle noise to accompany the light, sometimes there's not. With all myths, it has the uncertainties attached to it. On Canada Moto Guide, the editor of the Headless Motorcyclist on the Ghost Road article, Mark Richardson, stated, quote, sometime in 1968, or maybe it was 58, but a long time ago, end quote. This casts doubt on really when this happened. The Paranormal Seekers, who are an Oshawa-based ghost investigation group, has made an article noting the alleged hauntings of this road, but they have also a slightly different story. On their site, quote, one version of the legend goes that sometime in or around the year of 1957, a young man was testing the limits of his motorcycle on an old concession road. On a straightaway and pushing the engine as fast as he could, the road is short, so he soon realized he was quickly approaching the intersection where the 9th concession meets. About 100 meters from the south end, near a large tree, he lost control and plowed into a field. He caught himself on an old rusty barbed wire fence and was decapitated. Some say his head bounced off the rock. Some also say that he simply banged his head on the rock that is still located on the road and met his end that way. End quote. There is a rock on the road, though it is pretty small. This differs from the other story, specifically the year, 1957, while the other says 1958 or 1968. Something not mentioned though is that the road has an actual name, which is the Mississauga Trail, a long straightaway that is connected to Pine Point Road. This was confusing to me as I thought the actual road was called Ghost Road. Threw me through a loop on Google Maps trying to find these images. These are overview shots of the Ghost Road or the Mississauga Trail. Sadly, the Google Maps car didn't go down this road, so we only get these satellite images. And if you're wondering why, well, it's because it's like an empty road in the middle of nowhere. They're not going to make the Google Maps car go down this empty road. That would just be a waste of resources. As you see in the overhead shot, there's only some few houses and two what appears businesses. But other than that, there's not much down there. So I understand why they didn't go down there. Now, I dug deep trying to find out if a man actually crashed on the road and was decapitated. To be caught in barbed wire and to be killed in such a horrific way would make the local papers at least, but I was unable to find anything. It's a legend that has big claims but little facts to surround it, though it is still pretty interesting. I have never been to the Ghost Road, nor near that area. I generally stick to Whitby or Oshawa Pickering. That's just my preference because I don't drive. I don't have a car, so I can't get up to these areas pretty easily, but yeah. But I have heard the legends of the Headless Motorcyclist. But honestly, I don't know who would think of driving down this road. Just from this image from the Paranormal Seekers website, the first thing you see is how dark it is, especially at night. And from the Google Map images, this road is in a pretty rural area, especially for when this supposed crash occurred. It's an odd legend to say the least because who would drive down such a desolate, no lights road? And I assume at night since he supposedly couldn't see the end of the road approaching. Now I will dive into my interview with Alex Cairns, and we will discuss the road, possible reasons for the hauntings/legends, and other haunted locations. I will then dive into the history of Port Perry and the land it resides on.
Hi, so my name is Bobby Morrison. This is Haunted Histories, Episode 3, The Ghost Road of Scugog. I am joined with my friend Alex Cairns. Hello, Alex.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Always down to talk spooky.
So, we were going to do the Ghost Road for our other show, the Paranormal Histories one, but you said you didn't really experience anything on that road. Can you tell me more about, like, where the road is and the haunting that's behind it?
Yes. So, I grew up in Port Perry, and so if you grow up in Port Perry, I mean, I don't know if it's still a thing that, like, young kids these days would talk about, but definitely in my generation when we were growing up, Ghost Road was one of the most popular ghost stories. Port Perry itself is just a really haunted town. There's lots of different establishments and different histories that kind of lend themselves to being very haunted. But Ghost Road in particular was one of those places where, like, you hear about it when you're a little kid. When you get old enough to go, it's like this big event that you and your friends are going to go to Ghost Road on a Friday night, and like it's a big thing. And so I probably first heard about it when I was about like 10 years old, and then I went there when I was like 13. And yeah, like you said, like when we were actually there, nothing really happened. There's lore around, what you're supposed to see. I mean, the entire story is based around a motorcyclist that died there in the 1950s. Oh gosh, is the morning done? And, as the story goes, he was riding his motorcycle, didn't realize that the road was coming to an end. And he tried to stop, but he fell off his motorcycle and fell into a barbed wire fence, cutting his head off immediately. And so what you're supposed to see maybe is a bright light like coming towards you like a motorcycle light would, and then at the last minute the light goes out and it turns red, to symbolize like he's done, he's toast. So I didn't experience anything like that when I was there. I think it was more the buildup of the event of going, just because we had heard so many stories of what other people had seen and experienced, and then driving there, getting there was like pretty scary, and then once you're there it's just kind of like anything can be scary in the dark. You're on a road, you're a group of young kids by yourself, like it was scary, but I definitely didn't experience anything that was just like, wow, that was definitely something. But the lore around it is really cool, and it's definitely like a little piece of history tied to Port Perry. And I did my part. I tried. It was still fun.
Do you think the lore is really what's fueling this alleged haunting, or do you think it's just people's wild imagination running itself?
I mean, I think it's both. And isn't that the case with like any haunted story, where it's more the story around it, it's more the build-up around it. It is that lore that people pass down the story, and it kind of changes or it evolves in a way. But yeah, I think it is more of just like the excitement around it, that this could be a thing, and that this has been passed down, because this alleged event happened in I think it was 1957 to be exact. So many years ago. And so, yeah, I think it's just cool that, like, you know, whether it really does happen or not, yeah, the fact that, like, you know, this many years later, we're still talking about it. I mean, that's kind of what's fun about hauntings. You know, sometimes you're going to experience something, sometimes you don't, but it's like the story around it that just makes it exciting.
Yeah. And because you were mentioning that you were from Port Perry and there was other hauntings, would you mind just telling us real quick about some of these other hauntings? I'd just like to talk about the area that surrounds these places that could possibly influence other ghost areas.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely talk to two specifically, just because I have experienced them. Number one, I know we've talked about it before, but Jester's Court, the restaurant on Queen Street. That place has a lot of history. You could do an entire episode just based on the fact that that building has gone through, first of all, it's been burnt down twice, but it's gone through so many different things. Like, it's been obviously a restaurant, but it was also an auto mechanic workshop for a while. It was a bed and breakfast. Like, it just has so much history. And so, but it's been a restaurant since 1997, so since I was a little kid. And yeah, I've experienced a lot of spooky things at Jester's Court, specifically the women's washroom. And just feelings of, like, being really cold. And, you know, like, I remember one time I was having dinner there and my napkin literally jumped off the table, and not in a way where it's like somebody walked by, because it went, like, jumped up over the table and landed on the other side of the table. We were like, holy crap, that was insane. So Jester's Court is definitely a really cool one to check out. Another one is, I would say, the theater. I think it's Town Hall 1897, I think it's called. But it's the theater that's in Port Perry that, again, is right at the intersection of Simcoe and Queen Street. And that building also has a lot of history. I grew up doing theater, and so I did a lot of shows there. And yeah, it's definitely really spooky. I think, like, a lot of theaters, because they're so old, have a lot of haunted history and a lot of things that have happened there. I would say the spookiest thing that ever happened to me there was I was there late one night doing a dress rehearsal. And what theaters do, I don't know if you've heard this before, but they will leave one light, like, they never let the theater go dark. Yeah, they never let a theater go dark. They always just leave one light on. And so we were packing up, leaving for the night. The stage manager went to go turn the light on, and she did. We were walking out, and then it went out. We were like, oh my god, I think I was like 13, maybe 14. I was young, and I was just like, oh, okay. She was trying to be calm, because, you know, she was the grown up in the situation, and was just like, I'm just gonna go turn this back on. Turned it back on, walked away, went out again. And then I don't really remember what happened next. I forget. Like, I think we just left, because it was just like, okay, well, that was scary. And sure, maybe there is some sort of explanation for that, but we were very scared. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking for another haunted destination in Port Perry, I would definitely say you have to check out the theater, because lots of history there, lots of spooky stuff going on.
Oh, and just to circle back one more time, I just figured I'd ask, because of how, like, northern Port Perry is, do you think that could sort of be attributing to the hauntings too? Because it's like a sort of an isolated sort of part of Ontario. Now you get up there and you're like, oh, now I'm in Port Perry, but at first I was in like all this, like, nothingness. So
maybe. I mean, the history of Port Perry is really cool, of how it became you know, a town, and like the people who started developing on it, and even how Scugog Lake Scugog came to be. There's a lot of history there. I think what also needs to be mentioned, and is interesting too, is that, I mean, Port Perry is on the grounds of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. Like, there's a reserve right across the island, kind of where Ghost Road is, actually. And so there's a lot to be said about, you know, specifically with Ghost Road. If you actually read the stories, look up the lore of it, a lot of people talk about, you know, maybe there's a lot of activity from, like, the gentleman, you know, the motorcycle gentleman, But that was also for the longest time just native land, native area, native reserve. And there, there's a lot of native artifacts that can be found there. And there's a lot of, people who have gone with all their ghosty equipment and stuff, pick up like multiple spirits. And a lot of them attribute it to the fact that, this is like a very spiritual land. This is a very spiritual place. And there's a lot of activity perhaps based on that, not just from the people who came and colonized, but the people who have already been there. Because, they were the people who were here like way before any of that. And so I think that maybe attributes to the fact that it's like such a spooky little town. But yeah, just the town's history, like there's been so many fires where literally the entire strip of the town has just been taken out. I think it's happened at least twice that I can think of. That would attribute to it as well. It's definitely really interesting.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Alex.
Oh, thank you for having me anytime.
Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Alex Cairns. I thought it was important to get someone's view of this legend, as she has lived in the area. Especially, someone who's lived in the area, that's super important to get their views on local hauntings or local legends. But also for the other interesting tidbits on Port Perry alleged hauntings that she gave us. Port Perry is in the Scugog area, and as of 2016, had a reported population of 9,453 people. According to Wikipedia, the town has a 24-bed hospital under the Lakeridge Health Band. The town of Port Perry resides on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, as stated by DurhamRegion.com, which is a news website surrounding stuff that's happening in the Durham region. The town of Port Perry was settled in 1821, when the first settler being Reuben Crandell, who was a loyalist. As we have discussed in the Lynn's episode, a loyalist is someone who used to be American, but they keep their loyalty to the British Empire. Well, at the time, the British Empire. The town was incorporated as a village in 1871. The name Port Perry comes from a man named Peter Perry, who in 1848, quote, laid out village lots on the shore of Lake Scugog, and this was, quote, on the site of a former indigenous village known as Scugog Village, end quote. The town was then named Port Perry in 1852. The town still has deep roots to the Mississaugas peoples. As Alex stated, there is a reserve very close to Port Perry, and as mentioned on the Paranormal Seekers site, where Ghost Road or the Mississaugas Trail is, there has been artifacts found near the road. And to briefly touch on it, the two places Alex mentioned was Jester's Court, pictured here, credit to Google Images, and the Town Hall Theatre. As Alex mentioned, Jester's Court has had a long history with many elements to it. It has been many things before it was the pub it is now. I will get more into the pub in another episode. And the theatre court pictured here, credit to the Town Hall Theatre website. According to the theatre site, like the Courthouse Theatre in Whitby, Ontario, the Town Hall Theatre served as Port Perry's Town Hall and, quote, later as a fire station, a courthouse, a movie theater, and now as a live performance venue, end quote. In the 1970s, the town hall was reopened and turned into a theater. Pictured here is what Alex spoke about, which is a ghost light. These lights are meant to be left on to help people in darkened theaters to stay safe and not to bump into anything. But according to theatercrafts.com, this site also states that these lights were in some instances to, quote, keeping the ghosts away, keeping the ghosts happy, and ensuring the theater never goes dark, end quote. It's extremely interesting to think that ghost lights do have some paranormal attachments to them. And now we will move on to my final thoughts. The Ghost Road legend isn't something that is new. We've all heard the tales of the Headless Horseman and the Headless Soldiers being seen at Civil War battle sites, or at least I have from watching so many episodes of Ghost Adventures. A Headless Motorcyclist wouldn't be that far off. Port Perry is an old settlement and with that comes a lot of stories. I will, though, touch more on the Jester's Court and Town Hall Theatre, as I forgot about how interesting these places are and the unique alleged hauntings there in future episodes. But for the Ghost Road, the legend is very inconsistent. I think if it would be haunted, it would not be that of a headless motorcyclist, but that of the indigenous peoples who used to own and live on the land. As we have learned about a lot in recent years and through schooling, indigenous tribes have existed in North America way before many towns, cities, and even countries existed. And given that the paranormal seekers even stated on their site that artifacts have been found near and around the area of the Mississauga Trail or Ghost Road, it would not be impossible to think that this might be the influence of the legend. Even the fact that I was not able to find any actual info, credible info for that matter, the motorcyclist did die in a horrific way on the Rat Road or area speaks volumes about the legend, and for the simple fact, as I stated, that something like this, a decapitation via barbed wire or even a motorcyclist crash where a man died after being struck in the head via a rock, and I couldn't find any local news surrounding it, makes me think it's not real. Plus, if it were real, the area around where this alleged accident happened, the area is super rural, with only a few houses being seen along the road. Like I said before, there is 2 businesses now, but back then in the 50s or 60s, these businesses or houses probably wouldn't be there. So if someone crashed, it would be it would probably be a long time before their body was discovered. But that's just my thoughts. What do you, the viewer, think? Is the Mississauga Trail or the Ghost Road haunted? Do you think there is a headless motorcyclist haunting the road, or is it all a legend? Next time on Haunted Histories, the ParkWood Estate in Oshawa, Ontario. This home was owned by the late R.S. McLaughlin, the man who founded General Motors Canada. Beautiful architecture, interesting history, and possibly haunted? All that next time on Haunted Histories with your host, Bobby Morrison.